Wait. Did I forget to... Yes, whoops, sorry. There. Forgot to change the audio channel. There we go. We're back. So, Marxism. Let's talk about that. There's no way this can be controversial in any way whatsoever. Oh, hey, this tile's finally filled in. Okay. Okay, wake up, start building infrastructure. So, Marxism is a fairly new philosophy, all things considered. It is, of course, built upon older ones, as all philosophies are. Because that's just how philosophy is. There's no such thing as a new idea that is completely unprecedented. There are always, well, older ones that you build upon. Even if sometimes exactly what that is unclear due to, age. How long ago it's been since that idea was thought up of. But yeah, to be precise, Marx was a German guy. Did I build the... No? Did I build the conspirators hideout? Why is it not an option to build? Oh wait. That was the production view. Okay, fine. That was definitely not one of my better moments. But yeah, Marx was a guy from Germany who watched, pretty much just watched the liberal revolutions take place, the springtime of nations, and then decided to write about it, noticing some patterns within. However, well, that is the least of it. There's far... He isn't actually that important historically, up to a certain point. It was quite a bit of time after his death before he actually grew into prominence, importance, however to best put that. It took a while, that is for sure. Okay, the reed gatherer first, and the flint gatherer, then the grass gatherer, then the lumber camp. I think ancient customs is, yeah. I'll figure things out beyond that later. He actually wasn't all that important, because despite what some people would have you believe, he was definitely not the first socialist thinker, or the only socialist thinker of his time. After all, the insult, utopian socialist, or utopian period, had to come from somewhere. And yeah. Those were one of, basically, there were three sorts of thinkers that appeared during the early 1800s. The first group appeared and codified themselves, really, were the utopian socialists. They were an eclectic mix that are only grouped together because they kind of lack prominence nowadays. They don't really have any unifying themes 100%, but there are similarities between their ideas, enough of them, so that it is reasonable to talk about them. As such. Their ideas really are, for the most part, gone. There are some leftovers, of course people will eventually take a look at them again and think about, their contributions, etc., try to add their own, the natural, a natural aspect of philosophy, of course. Look at what other people think of and add those ideas to your own. That's that's part of how philosophy works. But getting back to that, the group 2 would be, the second group would be the anarchists, of course, with the very first self-admitted anarchists, because there were people that thought like anarchists but didn't call themselves that. Often referred to as the proto-anarchists, because, well, they thought a lot like modern-day anarchists do, but never called themselves that. A good example would be Henry David Thoreau. The government, that government which governs least is the best government. Which very definitively sounds not quite anarchist. At least minarchist. Which is a very separate thing, but can at times be similar enough under certain circumstances. Anyway, Broughton was definitely the very first self-proclaimed anarchist, and he was definitely a socialist too. Anyone that argues otherwise is either a Marxist that wants to exclude anarchists by something a little less tired than calling them all petty bourgeoisie thinkers, which applies more to Marxist thinkers, actually, than it does to anarchist thinkers. After all, what else would you call an intellectual? Most of them are petty bourgeoisie. They're the only ones with enough means to be able to spend that much time thinking, etc., on socialism. And that's fine, honestly. If they renounce the class and focus on improving the lot of others, it's fine. Like Bakunin and Kropotkin, two major Russian anarchist thinkers, were both aristocrats. But pretty much every major Russian thinker or artist or whatnot from the time was either aristocrat, came from an aristocratic family, so born nobility, or attach themselves to nobility, sometimes not on purpose, sometimes yes. Like maybe one of their parents married into an aristocratic family, or, you know, yield a patronage system, got hired by said rich people. Great, gotta replace that. And amphibious. Ooh, antelope camp. Right. Rebuild the lumber mill. And Proudhon actually wrote earlier than Marx. So, and the third and final group would be Marx and what would eventually become his own tradition. Which, by the way, he never called Marxism. I think the most specific it ever was German socialism, to set it apart from Proudhon's French socialism. Later people called it Marxist, which is still too personality culty for me to like it. But at least I can accept that it wasn't his fault. Ooh, scientific. Political will give me free specialists. I don't care if I'm military enough. Culture will give me extra culture. Agriculture will give me more food. Seafaring will give me, yeah, that's a lot. Let's go with scientific. That's like 4,000 science. I really should build more cultures in order to get more hero units that can build achievements. City, thank you. Yeah, it's been a while. You need to pick up your production. Agricultural expansion. Modern granary. You need a water tower. Where's your water tower? Because I know for a fact that you haven't built a water pumping station yet. There it is. Wow. That was higher up than I expected. Oh boy. Yeah. Still, as I said, it's a bit hero worshipy for my taste to call it Marxism. But I will continue to call it that because it is the accepted name for it, no matter how little I like that name. I don't like hero worship. It's not a good thing. Okay, since I haven't built the treadmill crane, these are actually the same production-wise. And that should have 9. Yeah, okay. So, efficiency is about 1 to 1-ish, so really all of these need to be built now. Not the cannery. That's plus 9. At the cost of 17, so the 2-wers should be fine, but that's it. Okay. Cost of 20. Yeah. 3 at the cost of 10. 5 at the cost of 21. 3 at the cost of 10 is actually a bit more accurate on what I need to go for, so. check the railroad station. Well, actually, this. Sure. Okay, the next thing I need to worry about is the gas lamps. So efficiency of 6. Oh wait, I should have done that first. Okay. There. Hmm. Great engineer. Okay. Enjoy your increased production. Admittedly, the Utopians were a fairly fitting name because they didn't. Because the Utopians merely posited a just society, what they believed to be a just society, and how it would run. They had no ideas on how to get to said society. And the ones that did tended to be fairly poor in quality. Okay, guess it's time to upgrade you to a Dragoon. Hawking Hut. Wonders of the Deep. Oh, railroads are getting built, so it's getting quicker to send units over. They didn't really have good ideas on how to get there. And some of the ones that did had, well... very, ungrounded ideas, let's call it that. Stuff like, oh, we'll just have to, um, you know, convince the rich and powerful to, you know, not do those things, those awful, awful things. Yeah, right, like that's gonna work. Not gonna bother with artillery. Huh. I know for a fact disease is fine here. Yeah, easily. Current culture level can only support 12 water runners. Oh, so the level increases over time. Oh, Honorable Supreme Court in the Discord warehouse. Okay. Okay, I need to get another set going, that's for sure. Musket Man and Pioneer. Yeah, the anarchists were at least different. Well, Proudhon was at least different. His ideas were actually kind of realistic. Namely, use the weapon that's already been developed by laborers, specifically stuff like, industrial actions and whatnot. And setting up cooperatives that will slowly outcompete the, well, capitalism. And it was a fairly decent idea, although there were issues, most notably the fact that the state had actual preferences of, capitalistic economics over the other possibilities. Yeah.
All that serves labor serves the nation. All that harms is treason. If a man tells you he trusts America, yet fears labor, he is a fool. There is no America without labor, and to fleece the one is to rob the other.
Hmm. Is that? Yeah, I think that's solidarity. The Polish Trade Union. Okay. Alright, time to adjust civics. 28 turns of revolution. That's fine by me. I'll get more science out of this. And I'll lose the workhouse, but that's fine. Right, I should actually think about where I want to place this settler. It's too early to set you up here. Hmm, over here, sure. Yeah, that's still a pretty good spot. Okay. And then the history starts getting gnarly, because while there are competing ideas, they generally didn't do that much. Heck, it got to, and there were, mixtures of ideas. Like, all of them were okay with handling elections early on, even the anarchists, until Proudhon actually managed to get himself elected. Yeah, he served elected office. And then the experience of, actually dealing with power over time made him realize how bad it was to deal with. How do I put this better? Specifically, all the things he complained about, how politicians didn't listen to the masses and thought they knew better than them, etc. He could feel himself start to think that way. So after he finished his term in elected office, he didn't bother going back. He didn't try campaigning to get re-elected. He instead turned around and said, look, actually going through public office is terrible for you, and no anarchist should even try. Which is a big reason to why it's no longer done. Anarchist participation in electoral politics only occurs as a joke. Or for particularly unorthodox individuals. Like, for anyone that plays Kaiserreich, the four elders in the left KMT, yeah, anarchists cooperating with the KMT are a bit strange. Okay, defend the city and plot one here. Dumbia. Okay, I'll probably... Yeah, plot one down right here. This is... Or perhaps further inland, I'm not sure. I mean, that is a whale tile there, but whales aren't exactly the greatest thing ever, so... On the other hand, Cross City is right here, as is. Has a gate A, so... Position's probably fine. It doesn't matter exactly where I put a city here, but I only need one city over here, and Persia's cities can pick up the slack in the future. Once I get around to conquering them, which I eventually will. Don't worry about it. Okay, wake up. It's been a while. Right, I need to set your production queue up, but it doesn't really matter. Just mining camp is automatically the best. It's gotten that good. I keep forgetting. Ooh. You're missing an entomology lab. Okay. Yeah. But there wasn't really that much interaction between the socialist thinkers and uh, the workers and others that sided with them until the Internationale came along. Again, Marx was pretty minor at this point, but especially since the Internationale was in the 60s, I think the first one. Okay, exact dates don't exactly matter. But by that point, the lines have pretty much been drawn within the various cities. They all have their own ideas. Not cities, countries. There was, to some degree, a nationalist flavor, but it was also just, differences and distances. You can only travel so far, of course. And there was definitely some level of favoring, because ideas can only spread so far. Proudhon's ideas, for example, were especially popular within France. Marx's tended to be the choice within Germany, etc. And there was some ideological competition that existed. And it turned out none of it was good-natured. Or, well, very little of it. It wasn't long before groups started accusing each other of, well, disregarding the revolution in favor of petty competition. Yeah. Or favoritism or whatnot. Although I do believe Marx started it first with that. Within the Working Man's Internationale. After a few months, Marx accused the anarchists of factionalism. And then through some politics, including holding a vote while the anarchists were away, a large portion of the anarchist faction was away, it basically enshrined the social democratic program. And yes, social democracy is in fact Marxist, or was Marxist. Back then, a social democracy was considered the best way to bring about socialism by Marxists. And the plan was as follows. Bring in universal suffrage. Then, knowing what was the best for them, basically bring in universal suffrage through agitation organized by the political party, which was a centralized organ that was supposed to also direct unions on when and how to strike, which had its own issues. I don't think I need to go into the details of why centralized organizations have problems, but anyway. Yeah, they had their own issues, but the labor unions would be directed by the party to agitate in favor of universal suffrage, and once said universal suffrage has been achieved so that everyone can vote regardless of social class or education, then the workers would vote the Social Democratic Party in. Who would then, well, of course, bring socialism through mass nationalization. And then, well, once the people were ready, release control of these organizations to, I think, the labor unions? Maybe. It gets vague after the whole nationalize everything, because no party really got beyond that point. Well, no, I don't suppose we comment on that specifically just yet. Whereas, yeah, and during a time and amidst power plays between both factions, it eventually got to the point where Marx orchestrated a vote during a time when large portions of the anarchist faction were away for one reason or another. I'm not sure if they were boycotting the vote or was something else. I don't remember. But they ended up voting in that the that the social democratic program was the only reasonable way to achieve socialism. And so that got enshrined into the Internationale, which explicitly left out the non-Marxist groups, especially the anarchists. Of course, a lot of the utopian socialists that were still around ended up joining the Marxist camp because, well, it was effective, reasonably. And the movement was effective in consolidating international support, specifically the Internationale, of course. Is the ship of the line a wooden ship? Sure, I guess. And this ended up causing the um, First International, well, the anarchists to leave the First International and set up their own called the Black International. Because very early on, black was considered the color of the anarchists. Anyway, the end result ended up being that the Internationale collapsed in relevance. Because despite the level of representation, a lot of labor unions actually preferred not to be told what to do by social democratic parties. And so, as you might expect, there ended up being, well, it ended up being irrelevant because the International ended up losing, like, France and the Low Countries. And considering those were 2 out of 4 important regions, with the other 2 being England and Germany, yeah. Especially when Marx ended up turning it, working towards it becoming what basically amounted to a propaganda division. For, Marxism. Which, unsurprisingly, is not effective for when it comes to building, you know, an actual proper organization. The Black International also didn't last very long, but that was more for other reasons. It was the fact that states generally saw the anarchists as far more dangerous than the regular state-oriented socialists. Yeah, the state socialists, as the anarchists called non-anarchist socialists generally. I mean, it became more nuanced over time for reasons. But the state saw them as more dangerous. First off, because, they actively challenged the power of the state, which made them a little more dangerous to deal with. Because at least the state socialists weren't completely out of left field when it came to their philosophy, at least relative to what politicians are used to. That, and it was also the area of the propaganda of the deed, which was the idea that if you were to do terroristic acts of revolt, like assassinations and whatnot, then the common people would realize how easy it is to resist the state, and then rise up in a great revolution. Of course, nowadays we know this didn't work because, well, if it did, um, you would not be watching this on YouTube. You would probably be watching this on well, not modern day YouTube. I'm not sure if YouTube would still be called that name, but it would be more like early YouTube, I would say. Maybe. I don't know. It becomes tough because it becomes tough to extrapolate anarchism wins scenario because the direction society would take would be extremely different compared to all the other options. So, I'm I don't think I'm gonna really 100% try, but right, I need to get you to handle the. Yeah, that is a good idea. Setting up the railroads here on the islands. Per farm. Far more expensive, far more valuable. Gets it up. It's still a young forest. Really? Yeah. Oh, and then there was also the Paris Commune. Yeah, that happened. It's ended up working, trying to work as a compromise between various socialist factions, uh, including, well, yeah, mainly utopian socialists and anarchists with a small amount of Marxists, usually siding with the utopians. Ended up doing a poor job of implementing anything. Because inevitably, When you have any sort of parliament and whatnot, there's going to be some level of debate and factionalism. Yeah. It's just a natural element of indirect democracies. If you have people whose job it is to debate and make decisions, they're going to debate and make decisions. They don't have anything else to do, or anything else to justify their salaries. Of course, it was still a moment that most socialists, especially at the time, considered to be a major loss. It was, very disappointing and saddening. They wished that it worked, and yet it didn't. Of course, um, there was actual correspondence that Marx wrote about this, and in it, mail correspondence, and, well, he did write for the International's newspaper, the first International's newspaper, and said it was, horribly sad that it got put down. Privately, according to some of the letters he wrote, he was actually overjoyed that this occurred because it validated his views. It validated German socialism over that of the French. Dire wolf remains. Oh, it's been a while. Unlike the enclosures that can't be built, so absolutely go for that first. There. The -1 movement cost is actually amazingly helpful, so. Of course, this eventually. Yeah. Of course, the various philosophies had their own histories that moved along. Anarchism tended to be more popular in the more southern parts of Europe, say Italy and Spain. Russia was yet another mixed bag for multiple reasons. And Great Hunter. Okay. Yeah, it's not worth it. And then the Russian Revolution happened. And I don't think I need to go into too many details on what exactly happened, but end result was the Soviet Union. Um, did its level best to promote only its specific form of socialism. So, Leninism, later on Marxism, Leninism, also known as Stalinism, all of which were very authoritarian. Anyone that tells you that Leninism is actually really democratic, you just need to understand. No. I mean, social democracy already has its authoritarian tendencies. Oh no. Great, I need to figure out which building is destroyed. Bronzesmith. Great. Including, and very notably, during the Spanish Civil War, um, they focused their funding on the well, the faction they preferred, which is honestly perfectly fine. I would have done that too. Then they instructed, when they, towards the end of the war, they instructed their faction to perform an armed coup of the government and force the other factions to fight on the, to adopt this ideology of theirs or die. Yeah. And those threats were done with armed force. Oh, and also, they had to, those factions also had to disarm. Especially, among other things, the anarchist militias, the Republican soldiers. I don't need to say this. Well, okay, maybe I do need to say this. Asking your allies to disarm in the middle of a civil war is a recipe for losing that civil war, and it makes it very easy to call you a traitor, because that's pretty much what you are at that point. And from that point on, there were very few organic revolutions that occurred in the world. At least not socialist ones. Most of them just were, well, either a proxy conflict from the Soviet Union, like in the case of China, or were directly conquered by the Soviet Union and then released, or were under threat of conquest by the Soviet Union and then released with a pliant government. See, most of the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact. The main exception to this happens to be Yugoslavia. which still early on ended up building a government similar to the Soviet Union, because A, it appeared to work, so why not? And B, they were demanding that this sort of thing happen in order to be considered as, true socialists by the Soviet Union, so... Because otherwise you were a revisionary. A revisionist. Yeah. Okay, we're back to normal. Including lots and lots of cheering. And of course, overall, the end result on ideology ends up being that there's not very much difference between socialisms, at least not what, you know, if you ignore anarchism entirely. Pretty much every socialist ideology espouses that they are Marxist, that they, you know, follow Marx's ideas. And a lot of them are fairly authoritarian. I would hazard to say almost all of them were authoritarian before the end of the Cold War. Once the Cold War ended, this became less of a thing, thankfully. But yes. And there weren't very many differences. Despite, all of the, fated enemy dynamic between Trotskyism and Stalinism, there aren't very many differences between the ideology. Of course, be careful who you tell this to, because a lot of people hate the truth on that matter. Oh, I never got a wildebeest before. Oh, that's a new culture. Okay. You need an entomology lab, so... Yeah. And I'll say it first. No. I mean, when you start to include anarchism, then socialism becomes a lot more diverse, which is very much a good thing. And there are nowadays a lot more, because they no longer can rely on the Soviet Union for support, there's a lot more openness with Marxist ideologies for external ideas, which is why libertarian Marxist ideas are coming up. Oh, by the way, on the origin of libertarian, despite the Libertarian Party in the US, it was actually originally a socialist term. I don't need the guinea pig breeder. If it turns them into industrial farms, yeah. Yeah, libertarian, despite how it gets used today, is at least in the U.S. Libertarian Party. It was actually a term originally invented in France in the late 1800s. See, because of the propaganda of the deed stuff, along with the Paris Commune, there was censorship in place in order to try to lower socialist agitation. Among other things, it was the word anarchist was illegal. And as the subversives they naturally are, the anarchists, well, anarchist printers of the time, just created the term libertarian for them to use instead. So for uh, legal reasons, in order to avoid further persecution, because there was plenty of persecution against socialists during the time. They call themselves libertarians. And of course, this eventually evolved into a sort of broader category where eventually, it ended up becoming a sort of split between three groups. The two groups with subgroups in each of them. Eventually, the term libertarian socialist ended up encompassing all socialists that wanted to avoid either destroy the state or avoid having to deal with stuff. So, minarchists are, an option here. Still need to build that Supreme Court. I'm going to get a local courthouse in every city. That's going to help with maintenance costs. So then, actually, where did I build that district court? Oh no, I need to figure that out. There. Get that built right away. Yeah, so it did lead to eventually a way of categorizing them, a new means, that still persists today. Um, on the one side, you have the libertarian socialists, which are, as I said, minarchists, as well as anarchists. That's pretty much the main distinction between the two. Minimal state, highly democratic, or all the way anarchist. And then on the other side, you have the statist socialists. Almost all, which most Marxists fall under. And then you have the split between the democratic tendencies that are fine with a powerful state, but want democracy to be. Oh, great. As you can see, the Aurora sits on a layer below improvements. Yeah. Don't worry, this sort of weird 3D model clipping is gonna come up later again, more often. Oh, how I despise it. Then you have, so, yeah, the ones that are, yeah, with democratic tendencies. So, modern day democratic socialists, once upon a time, social democrats. I'm serious about the once upon a time. They are no longer like this. It's been far too long. Ideas have diverged too much for them to actually want things like this. It's just the way things go with ideas. They diverge. And then you have the authoritarian socialists. So, pretty much Lenin and ideological descendants like Maoism, Stalinism, Titoism, etc. We had a very, very high level, very much a tendency, let me put it that way, to name things after the person, which is, again, way too personality culty for my liking. That's how it ended up being, so. Okay, I think I'll go for the realism tech and then call it for this session. But yeah, Marxism wasn't actually prominent at all in history and philosophy and whatnot, politics, etc. up until after the Paris Commune, and a while after the Paris Commune at that. Okay, I know for a fact that there can be Valkyrie schools built, right? Yes. Okay, seal enclosure. Yeah. Just gotta check. Okay, Funafuti, that's on Mononesia. Oh, dig side. Cultural extension. Net. Climb diggers. It does. Okay, I still need that water tower. Where's it? There you are. The local courthouses will build themselves upon the building of the Supreme Court. Okay, production, let's see. Gunlock Canals? Yeah, and then railroad station, streetcars, gas lamps, cannery, and then hotel. Wait, road signs first. Okay. And then the truss bridge. Have I built the officium yet? Looks like it. I haven't built the Harbor Master's office though. That's a cheap one to lower. So I might as well build it. Okay, science? Yeah, science. 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 Science and science. There we go. Right. Railroad to there. Falconry School, because it's more difficult to build that. And then the final tech.
Art is a lie that makes us realize truth.
Yep. That's what a fable is, any sort of story. The art of storytelling is in essence lying. You're fabricating a set of self-consistent sentences that nonetheless do not happen in the real world. And yet, through that, you can, in a way, communicate what's going on. Okay, so I need to build 3 opera houses so I can build the Sydney Opera House. I also need an opera house in the city in order to build a Bolshoi theater, which gives me a free theater in every city. And then there's this Bayreuth Festspielhaus that gives me extra happiness from opera houses. Anyway. Okay. I should go for at least modern sanitation. Yeah, it's antibiotics that did that. I can even go all the way to cubism without touching thermodynamics. But I think it's fine to just go for modern sanitation in order to get the funerary services out. Especially since it's also needed for civil engineering. Do I want to go for medicine earlier too in order to go for refrigeration? Compulsory education is when things, again, are very good because that's a lot of schools. It's yet another consolidating building. Yeah, modern sanitation, then I can further decide down the line. Yeah, I'll just do this last turn and then call it for the session. Drat! Well, okay. We're calculating one more turn. All the turns are not going that long, thankfully. They don't take that long to calculate. I'm not entirely sure why. But the graphics are definitely starting to chug a bit. So that's fun. So, stuff happened. I have settled more cities. Or at least this city. Yeah, okay, I did send a unit here, but I settled it. Yeah, okay, I settled the city too. Right. So more of the coastline is getting colonized. I'm probably going to send one last city here, settle one last city somewhere along here-ish. And then that's enough to, yeah. I think I should actually start grabbing these troops and sending them over to here. I think I'll dismantle the siege tower though. I don't think it gets upgraded, so. Send that in to deal with that. But yeah, I did get that hero unit that I talked about. Yep, he was built and I used him to get the great scientific achievement, which is why my science has jumped a bit again. I'm not 100% certain what to do for the next achievement, but I will continue thinking about grabbing cultures. Yes, I promise to think about it. Whether or not I'll actually do it depends on factors. Yeah. But yeah, I think I've gone on long enough. I'll see you again next time. Until then.